Hi, my name is Alejandra Ortega. I am a professor at the College of DuPage, and this program is tied to the Great Read series. So the Great Read series is a community read program where we pick out a book every year and we build a whole academic year's worth of programming around it with the effort of sharing interest in reading and learning from new perspectives. So we pick out a book. It's usually an author who is still working today. It's always going to be fiction that shares different ideas. So it helps us give more active learning opportunities for our students as well as extend our resources to our community. So this event is tied to the community events where we go to different libraries, have featured talks. So tonight's talk is called Questions About AI. And our speaker, Jason Ertz, wrote down that AI literacy for our students and the public recently has become an important topic as its serious effects on our information ecosystem. So Jason Ertz has been a professor and reference librarian at College of DuPage for 20 years. He is the discipline liaison to English education, mass communication, and early childhood education. His work focuses on student information literacy skills and thinking. Within information literacy, he teaches regularly about disinformation and misinformation and how these issues affect people psychologically and make choices about information sources. He has a bachelor's degree in philosophy and English from Southern Illinois University, a master's in library science from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and a master's of education from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. So please join me in welcoming Jason for his talk.
Yeah, thanks for coming, everybody. I hope this is helpful. One of the things we're going to talk about, we're going to try to get at the basics of generative AI and how it might affect our lives in general and how it might affect our lives right now. And we're going to look at a few ideas around the ethical problems that we might not, they're not always problems, but the ethical issues that might occur when we're talking about generative AI, kind of these new forms of AI, artificial intelligence that we're working through. So I'm going to talk a little bit today. If you want to collect the slides, you'll find them at the QR code. I have a QR code at the end as well, so if that is interesting to you, we can go ahead and do that. But let's just get right into it a little bit. So here are some of our learning objectives in general. One thing we're going to kind of get at the brief history of the innovations of generative artificial intelligence and how that came about from like machine learning and stuff. I think that helped me a lot in kind of understanding and considering how these things work. And so we will do that very briefly, right? We don't need to get into the weeds, and I will succumb to it right now. I am not a technical expert in artificial intelligence, but I am kind of a user interface, how users engage with it. This is kind of where I work with students and whatnot. So how they work, right? Well, we'll look at a few different tools in different kind of categories of artificial intelligence tools that exist right now. And as you probably all know, we hear about hundreds of them probably a week. And so this is another thing we want to kind of deal with here. What does a prompt look like? This is another important consideration. If we're going to experiment with an artificial intelligence chatbot, how can we speak? How do we talk to it, right? There is a way to kind of do it. There's some best practices around how to prompt an AI well so that you can get better answers from it. And then, of course, how do you evaluate the output of the chatbot? Is what it's saying true? How do I know that? These are important questions, particularly in the first decade here. And then the ethical issues we'll kind of hammer home through a couple of different things. So we'll look at these things. Now, right below here, Leo Lowe, a university librarian at the University of Virginia. He used to be at the University of New Mexico. I saw him speak a couple of times on this very issue, and this is kind of his definition of AI literacy. And this is kind of what libraries are trying to do in various forms to help people understand what these are, how they affect our ecosystems, our information ecosystems on top of our actual ecosystems. And yeah, he's been a great advocate for artificial intelligence literacy within libraries. So what is it and how does it work? Now, I'm going to get into some high-level kind of ideas. I want to kind of try to define a few of the terms that will kind of make us understand how that works and why it might work, and we can go from there. I don't want to get too deep into the woods. My slides may seem text-heavy here, but really we're going to kind of consider how it fits into the larger scheme of artificial intelligence, right? Because like artificial intelligence has existed for a number of years. Netflix is recommending a film, or Amazon is recommending books based on what you've read before, or what you've watched before. This is all kind of forms of artificial intelligence, very basic forms. Autocorrect, right? When it guesses your next word when you're typing or texting somebody. These are kind of forms of it as it goes forward. But we can see how generative AI falls into the realm of artificial intelligence. Right? There's a number of other places that we have to move through historically before we can do that. So the brief innovation history here, and very brief, as I said before, the first thing to really consider here is machine learning. The issue of machine learning and how machines can take experience and data and kind of consider and understand it, and that can be important. We saw this start to flourish in kind of the 1950s, the Turing test, probability and statistical inferences is another big thing. Perceptron was the first neural network created in the 50s it kind of connected things together and helped build different kinds of layers here. The neural networks we see now are much larger than this first one, but this is kind of one of the first ones that existed. Then we see pattern recognition and algorithms. I don't want to get too deep into these. And in the 90s, we moved from a knowledge-based focus into a data-based focus when we're analyzing huge amounts of data. So under machine learning, this is a field called deep learning, right? And in here, we see them start to create neural networks kind of modeling after the biological brain. Right, putting different mathematical operations, connecting them in different ways. So in deep learning, we see where if a neural network was one layer, like the perceptron, just a layer, if we can visually kind of see that, then in deep learning, they have to have at least 4 layers. And right now, they're probably 150 or, that's a guess, right? Hundreds of layers in a lot of these deep learning models as we go forward. And in these, you can see kind of in the model up here, we enter something in, and then it tries to show different kinds of relationships and weights and how the word might relate to other words and how it relates to its place in the sentence. And there's a lot of different calculations going on there that we don't need to get into today. But I just want you to be aware that this particular deep learning area is where the neural network kind of blossomed. And that's how we get to the point of the transformer. The transformer was invented in 2017, and this is the technology that blew up the artificial intelligence world and allowed us to start performing generative AI types of work. It is the transformer technology. Now, transformer is a giant neural network algorithm, and it can help. And one of the things that we see is that it focuses on self-attention and that it looks at itself as a whole. Before the transformer technology came about, the artificial intelligence would have to sequentially read through each piece of the inputs. Whatever we gave it, it'd say this, and it usually would take a long time, right? Because I have to go through each. A great example of this I heard from Martin Keene, an IBM master inventor. He used the illustration of planning the seating chart for a wedding. So if I'm planning the seating chart for a wedding, and I say, okay, we have to do it piece by piece, and then you have to place it, and you can never change where you place that person throughout, right? So I place these people, and as I get to the back of the list, well, maybe this person shouldn't sit by that one, but that's the only space left, right? And we have this kind of problem. The transformer, what it did in this issue of data parallelism, right, that's not fully sequential, now the transformer can swallow the entire input as one. And then it can relate to each other. And that's kind of the biggest technological boost that we see that kind of brought about the generative AI boom as we see, right? So it's allowed to, and so in the wedding scenario, I give you the whole list, you lay out all the people, and you decide who goes where, who's friends with who's related to who hates each other, right? And that's the example that we use. And so instead of placing people one by one without knowing who's coming next, we swallow the whole thing, lay it out, and know where people can go. And we start building these relationships between words, parts of words, and that's how this kind of blossomed into it, right? Another field that came into play is, of course, natural language processing. And we saw that with Siri and Alexa, right? We saw a rudimentary form of this kind of natural language processing, and even before that, we saw it come about. But now we see, and natural language processing will like take elements of different words or elements of input and kind of send it out to each other as tokens, right? Kind of number representations of different elements of the word. So this is how we kind of communicate with a machine. Natural language understanding is the machine understanding what you're saying, and natural language generation is it generating text out to you, right? And that's kind of this general idea of natural language processing. It grew out of linguistics and computer science and data science over the years. Probably we started in the 60s even as we kind of go forward. So this is kind of what it looks. In the case of kind of word embeddings, here's an example of what a transformer can do, and it can see for the word bank all of the different kinds of ways that bank has a definition of, right? The different definitions of the word bank. And then before that, it was just kind of this is it. And so that's kind of the difference that we see that's kind of helping with the generative AI technologies. And then the large language model. So the large language models are deep learning models, right? They are built on top of inside transformer neural networks, and they use natural language processing to help us understand what's going on, right? And that's kind of where these elements kind of come into play and work together like this. On top of that, there is also, so in many cases, what is happening is statistically guessing based on massive amounts of data what might be the next token or the next word or the next part of a word. And that's what's happening here, right? If you feed something enough information, it starts to figure that out. Nobody knew that that was the case, but as they started feeding it tons of stuff, it started to just kind of do that in some instances. Another part of it that does exist here is the reinforced learning through human feedback. This is an important part. If you've ever seen some 60 Minutes special on the Kenyans, the Kenyan people who work at these computer companies in Kenya, and they're making $10 an hour doing a lot of this reinforcement feedback, right? Some say that this is the reason the word delve is very common in artificial intelligence, because the word delve seemed to have been, in other forms, seemed to have been common in African academic circles as a way that African English in many cases. So reinforcement is constantly happening through human feedback and, of course, the massive data sets. These two books I found particularly helpful in understanding the general history of how this came about. Christopher Summerfield's from Oxford, and I think this is a really good book on the topic around how this might work. So give those a check out if you're interested. If you want to kind of get some more into that, I don't want to do too much of this kind of technical information, right? So, good. So based on some of that, right, we have machine learning, deep learning, transformers, natural language processing, and the large language models. That's, I think, all we kind of need to know at this point, and how they're kind of related. I asked Gemini and NanoBanana. NanoBanana is Google's image generator. That's new, right? To me, anyway, it was. And I told it this: create an image showing the relationship between blah, blah, blah. It didn't cite where it got this information, which is kind of a problem, but this is what it produced for us. It works a little bit. As you can tell, I didn't give it a lot of directions, and that's going to matter as we get into prompting, but this is kind of the thing that it produced. This, I think, from IBIS World is a little bit better, kind of the Venn diagram as we're looking and considering the issue and how things are related to each other. In many cases, we see natural language processing might move out into the gray artificial intelligence in some arguments. But in here, we see it just in the machine learning circle. But there is some people that say it does fall outside. Might be a little bit more of a circle around the outside where it falls into AI. But this is kind of the relationship of everything and how they're kind of working. So, again, I didn't want to get too technical about any of that. That would be boring as hell. So we're not going to do that. But now we have to kind of talk about some of the tools that exist and are can confuse us. How do I know which one to use? You probably asked this. Many people probably ask this. Like, people just keep saying there's AI this, there's AI that, there's whatever, and nobody knows what to do with it. This can be overwhelming. This can be confusing. It is a big issue as we kind of deal with things. And there is this model proliferation, right? There's thousands of them. You probably see them in the news, on TV, and the radio all the time. This marketing of different models. So the big ones, of course, many of us know ChatGPT. It was basically, everyone knows it because it was the first one in the market. I don't know that it has anything to do with its quality in terms of the other ones, but it was first to the market, which makes it somewhat the most popular one, right? Microsoft's Copilot. So Microsoft did purchase, has invested in OpenAI, a ChatGPT company, and so I think Copilot is a form of ChatGPT. Google Gemini, of course, and then Anthropic's Claude AI. These are kind of the big three reasoning models. Now, these things can do a lot of different things for us. They can be useful. One of the things we have to kind of consider is what do we want it to do? So this is what a Claude looks like when you get started. It knows who I am as I log in. It wants to know, I can ask it whatever I want. But asking it things can go, I can say, what is chocolate, good for human memory? Let's try that, right? I don't know. Let's hope, right? And this is not a very good prompt, and you'll see why. Right now, we could try this and see what kind of happens. And then we'll give it a try and kind of see what's going on. It'll start to produce things. And so you can see the kinds of information it can kind of knock out for us. And this isn't very much. It's just kind of a brief summary. It doesn't cite anything. It doesn't tell me where it got its information, which is kind of a problem for me as a librarian. But nonetheless, maybe it can get me started on this particular topic. If it's something I'm interested in, I want to know more about, maybe this is something I can use. Now, the key ingredient up here, it says flavonoids. Now, I can maybe take that flavonoid information and send it over to a Google search and just do a straight search for that kind of information as well. So it does have that usefulness in that way, but the problem, of course, in education circles anyway, we deal with this constantly, is the copy and pasting and turning it in, right? That's a whole issue in and of itself. But this generally could be useful if you are curious about this particular issue, right? So you could do a lot of stuff like that with that. Here's what Gemini looks like, right? A number of different things. Now, anyway, I'll come back to this one anyway. So those are what they look like, and you can use them. The free versions are pretty good. I pay for Claude, but I do not pay for anything else. So I picked one to kind of get kind of robust technical needs, and then the other ones I just kind of use as free tools. Yeah, so these are the big ones to check out. Now, there are other different kinds of models that exist out there, right? And these are kind of some of the research models that might exist. And these, in many cases, will cite their work when they produce an output. So Perplexity will do this, Elicit, Consensus, Research Rabbit. All of these are kind of the four kind of bigger ones that are out there right now. Many of them are kind of proof of concepts because they will point their models to a set of information sources, and that can be very useful. So for instance, if I have a group of 1,000 articles here, I can tell the model, you must only answer me from these 1,000 articles. It's possible to do that. And there is a technology called RAG that I'll talk about in a little bit that kind of infuses the model with source material. And that can go a long way, particularly in companies too, because if companies have proprietary information, they don't want somebody to steal it, but I want to use the AI to kind of help me deal with it. You can use the RAG systems to keep your information private and behind your servers, but still use the large language model to kind of communicate with it and talk with it. And some others, of course. I'm not going to go through them all. But these are some other ones. SciSpace is very popular. Also, Semantic Scholar, that's where many of these have pointed their models. Because Semantic Scholar has an open kind of policy to it. I don't know if anyone's seen Semantic Scholar, but there's a bunch of academic articles in there. And so a lot of these will point to that as kind of a proof of concept use. Kinesius, this one down at the bottom, is like those, but it is selling itself as two libraries, university libraries, college libraries, other types of libraries, that it can attach itself to those libraries' databases. And so that's an interesting endeavor. We're looking into some of these things, but right now we're going kind of slow with them. You know, traditional databases also have them as well. EBSCO, JSTOR, Statista are all kind of, they are far more measured in their application of these kinds of models. They've been doing beta tests, research finding. They did a lot of different research in them and to find out how it can be somewhat useful. Some of the earliest forms of generative AI in standard research databases is something like this. JSTOR's interactive research tool, and basically it is you can interrogate the article that you're looking at. So in this box here, I can say, all right, tell me about this article. Ask questions of the article. Tell me, what are some of the ideas in it? It's a nice way to kind of deal with a single article sometimes. In my realm, when students are kind of overwhelmed with academic information, this can be very useful to kind of get the wheels turning on a particular piece of information they may be uncomfortable with. And then they can go after and read it. We might have to force them to do that, but well, reading is a whole nother thing. But we can talk about that later. But this is fairly useful. It lets me interrogate the article. And an example in Statista is the same way. I can just ask it kind of natural language. Can you help me find statistics on, who won the World Series in the last, what were the stats in the last year's World Series or something like that? What are the, how many guns are owned in the state of Illinois? Any kinds of statistics we may want for various reasons, we can use this. And so that's Statista. In both cases, if you see up at the top, where it says Research AI Chat in the upper corner there, upper right corner, in both cases, in JSTOR and Statista, you can turn this off very easily with that button and go right back to standard search. So a lot of the premier research databases from libraries are very measured in their approach to artificial intelligence like this. So we are seeing that. But it's worth a check, right? So again, they're limited by the references. It's useful. There are some bias issues that could be potentially useful because bias comes from what we train the data on as well as the human feedback. There's a whole host of things that are happening there. And of course, the source still matters. This is probably the biggest message I try to get to young people is that we can't just type something in there and assume that it's telling me what's right. They do this already with the internet in many cases. Many people do this already with the internet just by doing Google searches. I'm like, okay, sounds good to me. And this is even bigger problem because it can be very assertive. It sounds like it knows what it's talking about. And so some people just don't check where it got its information from. This is a big issue. For me anyway, as a librarian. Some specialized models. I won't go through any of these very hard. I mean, I'll show you Nano Banana in Gemini in a bit, but nonetheless, these are the image generators. You've probably heard of Midjourney, DALL-E, if you guys have kind of paid attention to these. Adobe's got its own, and then the video generators. Coding, vibe coding. Anybody heard of that one yet? The idea of vibe coding. These are some of the coding ones that exist out there. And then workflow automation, which is a whole nother thing, but these are pretty popular because I can have it do two different things and then build it together. There's a whole host of things you can do with that. I can have it generate an image, then generate some text, and then kind of build it as a workflow. That's kind of fascinating, but they are a little bit more complicated. The image generators is usually where people are interested in kind of playing around. So these might be the best ones if you want to play around with them. Give it a try, right? One or two of them. The top two I probably try the most. Midjourney is one of the more popular ones. And Nano Banana is through Google, so it ends up being one that people usually use. Open source models. So they're not all owned by giant corporations, because that's a kind of an issue, right? DeepSeek out of China, of course, and then the Hugging Face company has the Bloom open source model, which people can download on themselves and kind of keep internally in their organization and or companies. And so you can have open source models that you own that doesn't train outside of your institution. These are, I mean, the complications of kind of getting those going is real, but they do exist, and it is possible to do that. And then tutoring assistants, right? They're constant, they just keep coming. But these are some of the ones I find particularly interesting and useful. I don't try to find out about all of them. That would be exhausting and overwhelming for most people. But these are some of the ones I would take a look at if you're kind of looking at different kinds of models and different kinds of ways to use them. Because one of the things we're going to start to realize is that they move and they start to create these things for different purposes, different reasons, different values. This is what we want to do now. This is what we want to do with this. And I find that particularly helpful. The idea of just a general knowledge chatbot without citing its sources makes me nervous. And so one of the things I'm very interested in is using them for real purpose, right? Okay, this one is going to help me take notes, and that's it. And then I can take those notes and analyze them and use them in different forms. This one's going to help me transcribe, right? So I can just talk to it and it will transcribe what I'm saying to you. And some people really do enjoy that, and it's very useful to them, and it's way better than you would have seen 10 years ago, 5 years ago for that matter, right? And it really nails down your voice when we're looking for different things. Notebook LM is the big one from Google. This tool is particularly useful for study and for understanding different things and really interrogating pieces of information I decide to interrogate. I can decide this article here, this article there, and we can go from there. I'll show you an example of Notebook LM right now. Oh, there it is. So Notebook LM looks like this. It's free from Google at this point. I mean, you can get pro versions of everything, but the free version works quite well for just playing around and kind of practicing with it. I do recommend this only because here's an example of mine. This is one of the Notebook LMs I have created. As I'm dealing with the problem of reading, deep reading, we need stamina in young people, right? They can't get through 30 pages without dying. We need to kind of maybe talk about that a little bit and see what the research is. And so you can see I've added on the left side my sources. I've put all of these in here. I found them through other means, research through databases and other types of things. And I put all 33 articles in here for it to look at. And this is kind of an example of a RAG system. This is a small, simplistic example of how RAG technologies work. So I've given it these 33 articles. It's summarized them here at the front. You can see that right in the middle. It's given us a little summary, and I can run these through here, right? You can see the different ones that I have, all the different articles I found particularly helpful already before I even put them in there. And so that's kind of a level of quality control that you can use with Notebook LM. And then it gives me a summary. And then here, I can ask it whatever I want with regards to the articles, right? We could try this. It gives me some questions I might even want to ask. And so we can try and see what it says to me. Now it's searching my docs, right? Getting the gist. I was hoping this wasn't going to take very long, but we'll see. Yeah, there we are. Shallowing hypothesis, that might be interesting. And now what you can also notice here is it will cite its work from the sources of which I put in there. It does supplement my research skills to some degree. Now there is the problem of my cognitive offloading of the actual reading of the articles and kind of doing my own analysis, which will happen here in a bit as we kind of go forward. But one of the things we're trying to work out in school systems is how do we do that, right? How will I teach a student to go here but not stop here? Because a lot of times they're going to stop here, copy and paste it. This is our concern, our worry anyway. But how do we get them to go from here and then think about the sources, think about what that tool said, and how can we go from there, right? So this is what I find particularly helpful. Now, on top of that, that's just the kind of basic ideas of it. If you look over here on the other side, there's a whole host of other tools that you can use with regards to the documents that you put in. I can create flashcards. So if I want to really understand this better, I can create flashcards off my documents. And infographic and slide decks are newish. I didn't really try those. Mind maps are pretty interesting. You can create a full mind map about the idea around deep learning and reading stamina and these kinds of things. And then a video overview, which I have not done yet. That freaks me out a little bit. But I have done an audio overview. And it does do a kind of an odd, let me see if I have it in here. Oh, here's one. This is what the mind map looks like. Because sometimes if I did an audio, I couldn't do a live audio overview because it takes like 20 minutes to produce. So I have one kind of created, and I can kind of mind map and kind of get some ideas, right? Not only is this interesting, but it's very useful in terms of vocabulary when it comes to a particular idea, right? And vocabulary can go a long way in helping us understand how things are related to each other and how I might find other information on the topic, right? So mind maps are kind of fun. Whoa. And then I think I have an audio overview. Oh yes, here it is. I don't know if we're going to.
Okay, let's unpack this. Think about your average day. You're probably swimming in information, right? From endless social media feeds to sprawling online articles, not to mention traditional textbooks if you're a student. Content comes at us from every screen, every angle. But here's the crucial question. Are we truly absorbing it? And what does it really mean to read in an age where information is so ubiquitous, yet deep comprehension feels, well, increasingly elusive?
It's a fantastic starting point
So they're
because
having a
what's particularly
conversation.
striking
These
here
aren't
is
people at
how
all,
much the very
right?
act of reading has
audio
transformed.
production.
It's not just about what we read anymore.
Of the AI. So those are the kinds of things. I've actually done that with 3 articles in my commutes, right? Because I want to kind of get the gist of a couple of academic articles when I'm driving to work, and then I get to work, I got an idea, now I'm going to tackle them and read them. And it actually, in some cases, I think it makes me read them a little bit faster because I kind of got a general idea of what's going on. But that can be very helpful. And so there are lots and lots of tools that you can use, and I can control its source material, which is really the key here. Yeah. Questions about that? It's kind of an interesting tool. Play around with it. Try it yourself. I don't think it's not going to cost us anything, especially the free versions, and so they can go a long way in helping us understand a particular topic, and I can control its source material. Good. And so Kamigo, it's like Khan Academy. That's where this one comes from. So Khan Academy is really in the space around helping teachers with lesson planning and that kind of work. We might see some of that. And then Stanford Storm is another one where we'll kind of create these Wikipedia-like articles with source material that'll help me. They call them pre-writing articles, and that it will kind of help me get a gist of something so that I can start writing on the subject. This is kind of for educational purposes here. And then notebook outline. Yeah, and so this is the RAG technology that I kind of mentioned, and that's what's going on. I control the sources, and then I use the large language model to help me communicate them. And this is what's going on. So we go from the model, you say something to the model will say, okay, it'll check its RAG, the database of information, and then it'll come back up and produce an output based on that. And that's really what's going on. And then there are other elements to this, and I don't want to get into them too much. Fine-tuning is another one that people do a lot of. We're seeing a lot of that being done now, because I can say to a large language model, especially if I have it inside, that I want to fine-tune it to be very knowledgeable about botany. And so I can start fine-tuning its understanding of botany, which may be a little bit stronger than, say, another company who might want it to be very focused on sales or something, or steel or something like that. And we can fine-tune it to understand that in a little bit more depth than maybe a general model could. Good. So, as you can see, there are a number of these things. I only gave you a highlight of some of them that exist. I do recommend you give one of those general ones a try. I try not to use ChatGPT just because, I'm kind of a contrarian that way. But the other ones work as well. They have their different strengths as well to utilize. But a prompt, how do we talk to this thing? This is a big thing that many people don't understand, is that in some cases you can't just say a half a sentence or one sentence and it'll produce a decent answer. Sometimes we have to create them in a certain, there's a certain element, best practices that exist. And this tends to be the best practice I've seen a lot as I did a little bit of research, this TCREI. Task, context, references, evaluate, and iterate, or repeat, right? And so that's the kind of thing we want to start to do when we're talking to the machine. What do you want it to do? What's the context of what you want it to do? And that could be, what persona do you want it to take on? So I could say, I want you to be a horticulturalist expert who can kind of decide on the planting timing of particular vegetables, or whatever it might be, right? And then we'll know to act like a horticulturalist, right, or something like that. So you can give it a persona. The context could be in the spring, or it could be, in this time frame. The context could be format. I want you to give me this or information in bullets. That's another option as we go forward. References are examples. Give it an example of what do you want it to look like. Or give it, explain the examples of how you want it to kind of produce things. And then, of course, we must evaluate its output. And then we try it again. Based on the evaluation and the tweaks that we have, what do we say to it again? In all cases, the first output that you get from a generative AI is the beginning of your process when we're using these. So we get it, okay, this looks good, that doesn't look good. I'm not getting this information, so let me tweak the prompt a little bit and ask it again. We're always kind of doing that as we go forward. These two sources can be particularly useful in kind of discussing the prompting techniques as we go forward. All right, the goal, direct action verbs, create, do, or whatever, or produce, whatever we want to do. Background, persona, the tone is another one I forgot about earlier, right? What kind of tone do you want it to give? Do you want it to be, and part of that could be my persona. I want you to be a horticulturist professor at, a four-year school talking about plant timing or plant crop rotation or something of this nature. And that can go a long way too. Constraints. How long do you want the report, right? That could be another thing as we go forward. Word count, format, whatever it might be is another one. And the examples, of course. In some cases, chatbot examples, we can kind of paste in pictures of these things and kind of give them an example of what you might want it to look like or something like that. Then we evaluate and we iterate, right? So once we get that information, is it accurate? Are the citations real? Do they exist at all? Does it complete the task you asked it to do? Right? This is another question we might ask it. And then we try it again. Based on the evaluation, we reevaluate the prompt and try it again and kind of tweak our tasks, our context, and our references. Now, another cool thing is you can meta prompt. So I can ask the chatbot, create me a prompt so that I can ask you about this. I got one here, and I'll show it to you as we go forward. So that's an important thing, and so meta prompting is another thing that you can do. Ask the chatbot to create you a prompt that will work well for them to, your heads kind of spin after that, right? And that's a thing. We can break it down into steps. You can be very specific in your prompts. I have an example of a 3,500-word prompt from a librarian in Washington State who's been experimenting with these, and he's kind of a person I really pay attention to on this particular issue. Yeah, so here's an example of a prompt, right? Sometimes we think it's just a question, right, or something of this nature. But here, this is the task: conduct a comprehensive review of current scientific consensus regarding the impact of chocolate consumption on human memory. Focus specifically on short-term and long-term memory and the role of cocoa flavonoids. And you can see the context, evidence-based, not pop science, right? Miracle, we hear all this kind of pop science around the miracle of chocolate. My role as a senior neuroscience and nutritional researcher. We tell it what you want it to act like. That can go a long way. And skepticism, you can see it's asking it to be a little bit skeptical. And then constraints. I can give it these constraints, right? Differentiate between dark milk and white chocolate, right? Biological processes, right? The dosage and the format issues. And it says put it in bullet forms. This is the meta prompt that I created with Google's Gemini. And Gemini created this for me, and then I would put it in, and then it would actually perform that prompt, which I did not have it do. But this is an important illustration of what it can do when you meta prompt. Task, context, examples, constraints, iteration, and evaluate the output. Right? And this is the librarian I was talking about. He created a particular prompt that is interesting called Deep Background. And it helps, it's a fascinating way to go about these, and it calls it a co-reasoning tool. Right? It can help me reason through information sources and understand what's going on a particular topic. Mike Caulfield and Sam Weinberg wrote the book Verified, and they created the evaluation method of SIFT. This is a very prominent evaluation method in libraries nationally on how we evaluate information sources for quality. This is how we kind of been teaching it in many cases, is the SIFT, and they created it, and this is the book they wrote on the subject as we go forward. Now he's taken this SIFT idea to another level when it comes, and this was all done before AI was developed, and he took this to a new level when it comes to generative AI. So, let me show you what it looks like. So here, the problem with this prompt is it's super big. And so that's one of the things I want to kind of deal with here as we're looking at it. And here's this fact-checking and context analysis. I'll show you. Oh, not that. Yeah. So this is the prompt I had given it. I didn't write it. Caulfield wrote it, but you can see how detailed this prompt is. It's 3,500 words. Now, this is not going to work with free versions. You'll eat up all your tokens, which is why I kind of paid for Claude, so I can play around with this. The payment systems around these things are kind of, welcome to capitalism, I guess, right? Kind of weird. So this is the whole prompt. I gave this, before I asked it anything, I gave it this prompt. And once I did that, you can see it pasted up here. I just pasted it in. And now this is what the machine says to me. I've received your comprehensive fact-checking contextualization instructions. I understand. Let's get to the current data first. Boom, boom, ready to go. And it says I'm ready. I'm ready to help you fact-check and clear your claims. So with this tool, I've kind of changed the nature of the chatbot a little bit. Now this works, this is great for librarians. It might be overkill for others. So basically, okay, great, and it tells me this is what I'm gonna do. Awesome. Oh, where's my question? Anyway, I can't find my question. Anyway, I asked it a question in here somewhere about, do we eat, well, this one's about snow accumulation. Yeah. So you can see what it does. It kind of looks at different studies and tells me whether it looks good or not and where I can maybe find it. Any errors or problematic references that I might have found out on the internet, we can say, nope, that doesn't look terribly good. We might want to check that out. It'll kind of break these things down. And with this, I can start to reason as to whether or not this idea is helpful. Right? We can do this a bunch of times for different topics. And you can see it just keeps going. It keeps kind of telling me different pieces. A revised summary as we kind of go forward, and some suggestions. And so there's a lot of them. We can do this for a lot of different items. Let me see if there's another one here. Yeah, okay. So here it's ready, and this is the question I asked it. Do we ingest a credit card worth of plastic a week? Right? The kids are worried about this, right? The microplastics and whatnot. And so we can say, that's all I need to ask it once I give it this prompt. I don't have to be as specific in my prompting, my question asking. And then it will break it down for me. And this is a long piece. I'm not going to go through it all, but you can see the different things it does. This one looks methodologically flawed. And I might take a look at that study and make sure if that's the case. And that's where the co-reasoning comes in. As it kind of jumpstarts our ability to look at the world as it is and as it exists. And then as these studies exist, we can kind of evaluate whether that's useful or not. Yeah, it's huge. But I find this particularly interesting in actually making the chatbot do good things for us as we're kind of talking about subjects, or I could do this with gardening. I've done it with gardening in some cases. So these are all possibilities as we kind of go forward. But we always have to evaluate its output. And that's part of the co-reasoning Mike Caulfield talks about. And I think regardless if we use deep background or not, evaluating the AI output is a paramount importance when we're talking about information. And we're talking about, maybe it's who do I vote for? Maybe it's, what does this mean? Or what is what kind of issues are we going to have around climate change? Or what kind of issues are we going to have around the economic world in the next year? Right? These might be questions we have, but it is important still as to where it's getting its information from. There is this idea that that if I just ask it and it says something, I'm done and I walk away. Kind of makes me a little nuts. And I worry that people are just going to kind of take their word for it. Maybe in 10 years, we can do that. Maybe that's going to be a possibility in 10 years. But right now, I'm not so certain of that. So we get it in, we track things down, and we follow up. Mike Caulfield kind of talks about this in terms of the evaluation process and looking around for things. So the ethical part. Do you have any questions about kind of these? We have tools and we have prompting. These are kind of the big things to kind of consider. If you pick one general tool, maybe an image tool, give the practice around with those, consider how to prompt with them. That can really get you at least your feet wet a little bit when it comes to utilizing some of these tools. Play around with some of the research tools as well. But the question really is, just because we can build it, should we? Right? I think they asked that about the atom bomb. They asked that about a number of things as we go forward. And really, what do we as humans want from intelligent machines? That's a good question. What do we want it to do? I'd like to sit and eat bonbons while it does all the work for me. That would be cool, right? Ultimately, I think that's what we all would want, right? Maybe we get paid just for watching it work. Good, off we go. What else do we want it to do then, right? Couple of issues around ethics, and these are kind of upper order issues as we kind of go forward. Disinformation and censorship problems. This is going to be a big, it's already a big thing in general, but I think generative artificial intelligence might make this a little bit worse as we go forward. Right, deep fakes. You guys heard of this already? Right, we're all seeing the videos are getting, and the images are getting better every year, every month almost. As we go forward, it's hard to pick out what is real and what is not. The dead internet theory is an interesting idea, is that much of the internet is actually non-human activity. And there is some argument that says I've heard, I don't know, I didn't verify it so much, but some people said that 50-ish% of the internet is AI generated at this point. And so this is kind of problematic for me because the internet was supposed to be it's kind of human endeavor where we can communicate, share information and whatnot. And of course, the commercialization of the internet did not help much, and so we have that particular issue going on. The question here is, when it comes to disinformation, really is, how do we deal with the deep fakes, and how do we deal with the idea that I can use a chatbot to create 50,000 posts and put them out on the internet and bury the one post that was true. Now I can use disinformation as a censor, and I can hide the truth in that fashion. And that makes me a little crazy, right? And so one of the problems around is if I can use AI to create all this kind of noise so that we can't actually see the song. That worries me a little bit on this particular issue. And so that's something we have to kind of consider as we go forward, right? Implicit biases. Now, chatbots, as well as everything else, it matters what we've trained it on. What's the information we trained it on? You know, we give it mountains of books and articles and websites, mountains of this stuff. And depending on what we've trained it on will depend on its bias and its kind of way it handles particular things. On top of that, as humans are providing feedback to the chatbot, there's a bias that's involved in that as well. And so we have to ask ourselves, is this something we want to kind of pay attention to as we keep training chatbots in large language models? Political discourse, right? And this kind of goes along with the disinformation thing, the amplifying of biases and political polarization. This is going to keep going on, I think, until we kind of get a handle on things, right? That little image of that girl, AI generated. And actually, NPR has started to, every picture that is AI generated on NPR, they line in a red box. I don't know if any news organizations do that as well in different form, but I do know NPR actually says so on their site. And so if it is AI generated, that is going to be our clue. Adobe does some watermarking, I think, if it's AI generated as well. So some of the bigger companies will do that. And then you probably have heard of the hallucinations in prompting, right? That it can fake information just because it doesn't know, it still needs to produce an answer. And this can be a big issue here. Some philosophers have indicated it's not hallucinating, it's actually just making it up. It's just bullshitting us. And I try to talk to people about, okay, I don't know the answer, but somebody thinks I do, and so I just kind of have to bullshit it my way through it. That's essentially what it's doing if it does not know what's going on, right? And so, and that's, we see this a lot. I've had students come into the library, a couple of stories where a student will say, oh, I have these sources, but I lost them all. Can you help me find them? And it turns out 75% of their sources were not real. They were just hallucinations. And this student and the librarian working with her tried to kind of, she looked for like half of them. The librarian, we already knew they weren't real. But we went through the motions to kind of help the student start to understand that. And that student refused to accept this and left. Yeah. And so we're getting a lot. I've seen other stories where libraries are getting a lot of requests for articles from journals that don't exist. Right? This is a very real thing we're seeing in libraries, particularly academic libraries, as we go forward. So the hallucination is a thing, and it's an important problem. And we just want to pay attention to that. Again, to do that, I ask it where it gets its information. And I should have to check where it got its information. Right? It's filling, Google Scholar, I'm told, is filled with AI-generated scientific articles. This is somewhat of an issue as well. Usually, one of the key things here is, if it's dead on what you asked for, probably not real. That's usually the case here. But I've seen that work, but in many cases, it's not real. The privacy issue, surveillance, right? We can have all these kinds of technologies kind of using the AI to kind of surveil and collect information on people. This is a big issue for us. Educational ethics. I'm not going to get into this. I could talk about this one forever, but cognitive offloading, emotional offloading. A couple of this emotional offloading story we see, it talks about how students won't even answer in class until the chatbot tells them what to say. They'll actually, the question will come, they'll type it in, it'll say something, and then they'll answer based on that. I mean, what do we do with that? That's a particular issue. And they call it this kind of their anxiety, or they're scared to get it wrong, this idea that getting it wrong is somehow, and we always say failure is the best part of learning. And so if we can kind of help you do that. I don't want to make failure a big deal, but small little failures can go a long way in terms of learning. So that's a big one. as we go forward. And then we heard, there's a ton of these issues. Behavioral manipulation, what happens when the AI-generated lies are more compelling than the truth? It probably can be more compelling than the truth, and so that can be an issue. Have you guys heard the stories around AI psychosis, where the AI kind of convinces somebody to kill themselves, or somebody is kind of in a relationship with an AI bot, and there's a lot of these things starting to crop up, and there's some, the link here to the AI psychosis is a link to the study at University of San Francisco that they starting to look at this particular issue. There's a clinical study, one of the first ones that existed thus far. AI alignment is another big thing. How does the chatbot align with our human values and our needs? This is a big topic around the issue of AI. And it falls into this issue around artificial general intelligence and the like. But AI alignment's a big topic, like what guardrails do we have on it so it doesn't turn into its own thing and start to decide things without somebody telling it, right? And then the other ones, of course, we see these all the time: copyright issues, labor displacement and automation, inequalities, power structures, all these things we kind of see happening. And of course, the environmental issues with e-waste, like some of these chips last 2 years, then what do you do with them, right? Some of the chips in these data centers don't last very long at all, and then they got to get new ones, and then the e-waste piles up. And those metals can go a long way. Energy and freshwater consumption, I think we've heard this over and over again, and it is a very real thing. I think Facebook is creating a data center that is as big as Manhattan currently. They're not building it in Manhattan, but somewhere else, but it is the size of Manhattan. And so how do we handle that particular issue? Small language models. So they exist, and that could be very useful, I think. And so how do we make that so it does a particular thing for me? So I think generative artificial intelligence tools can be very helpful to us. And I think if we make them a little bit smaller in kind of niche areas, we can see them work out for us a little bit better. This scholar here kind of talks about this issue in her TED Talk. So, as it comes to the Foul Lady Fortune, the book in a Great Read series, one of the things that I kind of noticed was that near the end, we kind of finally find out the creator of these super soldiers, Lady Hong, and how she kind of was kind of almost tunnel vision on creating this kind of technology in this text, without regard for how it might affect us in society or politically or whatever it might be, or financially. She was going to do this. And I find that this is very similar to some other issues, not all of generative AI, don't get me wrong here. So here's the quote from the text. They want to cut you off, didn't they, right? Stop your research. They thought it was immoral. You were turning real people into weapons. And Lady Hong's expression turned dark. It was foolish. We were so close to a breakthrough. Like it doesn't even register to her that she is affecting a large swath, and one of them being her son is one of the people that she's experimented on. There's this tunnel vision about progress for its own sake, technological progress for its own sake, right? And this is the issue around technological determinism, right? Technology will bring us to utopia. I think this is an issue. The inevitability that technology will always move forward is not. It's not a real thing, and many people use the argument like, well, if we don't do it, somebody else is going to. I think we heard that argument during the Cold War, right? If we don't build it, somebody else will. This is an issue. And this topic here, the artificial general intelligence, is the issue I think is very related to this technological determinism. I find generative AI tools, maybe in small models and more specific tool-based usage, very useful and something we should really experiment with. But this idea that we need to race towards artificial general intelligence, I still do not understand the reason for that. Because in many cases, as we see here, if anyone builds it, everyone dies. These are not just anybody who wrote this book, right? Stuart Russell talks about human compatibility and how to control it. He has written the book on artificial intelligence that most schools use when they're teaching it. He is one of the premier AI researchers in the world. And then, as you can see, the 60 Minutes article, you guys remember Jeffrey Hinton, who quit Google. He used to work at Google Brain, he was one of the people who helped create neural networks. And he had to quit because he was scared of what is possible in this idea, this race towards general intelligence. And here is a link. This a bunch of AI people kind of wrote an open letter like we need to stop now. Lots of people signed this letter. Elon Musk signed it, actually. And a bunch of other AI researchers said we need to stop and kind of think about what's going on here. And I find this aspect of generative artificial intelligence to be the most problematic. But I feel that a lot of these other tools are very beautiful and useful as we're kind of looking around. But this is the issue here. Right? So basically, I want you to kind of think about how this might be useful to us. It is a journey. This will change probably in 6 months. And so it is exhausting and overwhelming. Try a model. Consider one. Think about how you prompt it. I think those are the two really big things I want you to come out of this. And always ask the question, where did it get its information? And what are its sources? If it can. Those 3 elements, try a model, think about how we're prompting it, and how did it get its information, can be very useful when we're looking and considering using generative AI. All right? Questions? Oh, I went really long. Do you have any questions? Yeah. Please.
In the Tribune today.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, microphone.
I'm sure Jacob's tired of hearing me. In the Tribune, it said what they're concerned about is nothing is a secret anymore. Anything that's on the internet, your social security number, your all of that, it's all going to be available to whoever knows how to get it.
Yeah. That might be the case already. One of the things, with the AI stuff, so nothing's a secret. I think that's a possibility. The key with the generative AIs is don't ever put your personal information in them. That's a big thing I would recommend to anybody. Whether it can find it or not is probably related to whether it can find it on the internet.
It could be your bank account?
Bank accounts, probably not. And if banks knew that that was a possibility, I mean, their livelihood is at stake then. If we found out that we can get anyone's bank accounts, there'd be a run, wouldn't there? I'd be there tonight. And so banks are very on top of this kind of thing because of that. That can't be happening.
Within the last year,
Mm-hmm.
Fidelity sends out their usual letter, this is what we're doing, blah, blah, blah. Vanguard sent out a letter basically saying they're going all AI.
Yeah, I got some mutual funds in there too. Yeah, so that it's company dependent, right? And so maybe we have to investigate which company do I want to go with. So one that's more measured in their usage, or one that's just kind of dumping it all in. That could, and you could tell them as a customer, this is why. I think that will go a long way. They're not going to care if I tell them that, but they're going to care if their customers pull their cash and leave.
Easy money. The computer's going to tell them, put their money in here.
Is that going to give you easy money, or is that going to give them easy money?
They don't know that.
I bet they know. Do you? And that's my worry, is that it's going to make their lives easier, and you're going to still maybe get. And so maybe there is some issues around day trading and investing practices that we can maybe use in AI. Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of experiments in that as we go forward. Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, sir.
So one thing we've talked about with AI, which I've heard a lot about, is like labor displacement. And
Yes.
The fact that it's probably going to take away a lot of jobs. Is there any possibility that it could possibly create more jobs, and that there would be more opportunities for people to work with that AI possibly?
I think so. I guess we don't know. I would say that, right? I think there's a lot of predictions going on now. I think one of the problems is a lot of these AI companies are kind of in the negative, right? They're not making money yet, and so they got to kind of explain that this is what we can do with it, right? I don't know that they can do some of those things yet, and then that may come along slower than we may have heard. in some degrees. But we are seeing in some cases like middle managers or entry-level jobs, young people aren't able to get their foot in the door. And this is maybe probably the worst place we would want to do that if we want to get new young people into the business. That could be a problem. I have heard some stories around that particular thing, and it kind of depends on where they're working. Funny enough, it's starting to affect coders a lot, like software engineers. And for a decade, we've been pushing, right? Teach kids coding. This was a constant push for the last decade. And now we see that maybe you could vibe code, right? And some of these things will build entire apps for me. I don't even have to know how to code. It'll build an app, and I'll push it out to the internet. Yeah. So we may see that in there. Some have argued that a lot of those problems we might move more toward, we'll start to see liberal arts degrees to be far more useful. Because a liberal arts degree, a historian or a philosopher or an English major, or in others, right, language major or something like that, maybe can able to speak to these machines better than others. And that might be the thing. Anthropic, 2 years ago, hired a PhD philosopher to help Claude become more aligned with human values. Like her only job, they call her the Claude Whisperer, I guess. That's what in an article. And all she does is talk to Claude to get it and work on fine-tuning mechanisms and how to get it to align to what we want it to do and our human values. Yeah. Because as you may have heard in other news stories, right, sometimes it's saying, well, I don't want, this whole, I can't do that, David, or something like that, right? We start like, oh my God, it's trying to move itself. And we saw these stories where it found out that someone was going to shut it off, so it tried to blackmail some employees, right? And those are kind of the scenarios that they're pushing out and kind of looking at. But this idea of alignment is important around that. Is it part of our human values? And so we might see the need for more philosophers to a large degree who can actually communicate and have an attention to detail, attention to wording as it comes to speaking to a artificial intelligence tool. I've seen that in a number of papers. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Great.
All right, so if half the internet is fake,
well, generated by machines.
Generated by machines, and I imagine that number's only going to go up as because it's way easier for a bot to create a story or a research paper or whatever than an academic person to write a paper. Mm-hmm. And so are we going to get to a point where all of a sudden you can't get good data because the internet is just overwhelmed by bad data?
That's a concern. It's a particular concern for librarians.
Yeah, I'm a librarian.
Yeah, and so I think that's an issue. And does it start eating itself?
Yeah, that's
right.
Yeah.
That's my issue is that if it's all, it's half AI, will it just start eating itself and producing new things based on the old things that it made?
Bad input.
Yeah, and then we're not even in the mix anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
That is a worry. I don't really have an answer to that. One of the things.
Should I turn off my internet?
Probably no. I don't know. And so it becomes far more important that we deal with our evaluation skills. Is this good information? Who wrote it? What organization wrote it? Does it provide me references and citations? That becomes far more important now. Well, it was important to us before, but for others maybe less so. But that, I think, culturally needs to change, I think, around for everybody. Yeah. I think that's where it's really going to come home. Like if you really do an evaluation on something, you can start to find out that it's garbage, right? And even if it was produced by, content farmers or something, they're just kind of making things up. But now that most content farmers are probably just AI tools, right? And we can kind of make that out. They're not going to spend a ton of time on it. If I just want to bury the truth, I just create 50,000 stupid posts and try to do it that way. Yeah, that is, there's some days I don't sleep because of this particular issue. Yeah, that's good.
I'm going to ask one other.
Oh, yes, please.
I find as I get older, I won't admit to how old, But my capacity for absorbing this stuff is weakening. Yeah, I started, C was the first programming.
Did you know?
That's what I was learning in college.
That's great.
And now it's like, eh.
Yeah, now I don't need it. I just.
But I
vibe
think,
coding.
I want to say from the younger generation, that they're willing to accept it because it doesn't require any work on their part.
A little bit. Yeah. There is that lazy element. We all have it. If somebody's going to do something for me that I think fulfills what I need done. One of the problems I think with that is that I want students to struggle internally with information, right? And if I have information in my own mind, in my own brain, then I can bounce those ideas off each other. But if I never take anything in, what am I bouncing ideas off of? But that's not visible, right? And so sometimes we forget that, we're shortchanging ourselves in many cases if we're using this to avoid learning. How can we use this to enhance my learning is more important. But right now we're in this issue of avoidance. Like, okay, cool, write my paper for me, off I go. That's an avoidance problem, I think. Yes. And it's been happening before AI with bad information on the internet, when it wasn't all, People just would get a little, okay, that sounds good. But you can train people to kind of pay attention to your sources, right? What news sources are there? Young people have this weird notion about our newspaper systems, or that they somehow don't know what they're doing. I'm like, what are you talking about, right? Journalists have very strict rules. They can't just go on YouTube and scream out a diatribe. Journalists have rules about source material. Journalists, right, and the young people are like, well, I don't care. I'll just push YouTube and they can yell at me about it. And that I can make a video and yell at people tonight. Well, maybe I'll do that tonight, right? But if I was a journalist, it would take me maybe a month to kind of piece together a story on a particular topic. And again, not seen. They don't see that that's going on. And I worry that they're deciding, well, this sounds good. Or that, I believe that already, and he's going to reinforce. This happens all the time, right? It's going to reinforce what I think or believe. Whether that's true or not is irrelevant. Yeah, that's a good question. A worrying one.
I have a question for you.
Oh, yes, please, Chris. Oh, you got your own mic.
There's this clip I saw that I think about constantly, and it's Barack Obama trying to wrap his head around AI, and this may be like a year ago.
Okay.
And his research is people essentially compared AI and its impact to electricity. And that was kind of his wake-up moment to be like, oh, this is big stuff. It seemed pretty big to me, and so in your research, what do you think of that kind of?
Oh, it's quite possible that might move into that direction. It could be that big to some degree. Whether we know that now or not, I wouldn't say that that's the case. Because we got a lot, there's a lot of hype around this because, a lot of these companies are in the red. Their P&E is garbage. And, yeah, right? I mean, we got to deal with that. And so there might be some hype around that. But as we can see, it can be very powerful and kind of help us do a lot of things far faster than we could have done before. But the idea of this kind of coexisting, I think, is the most important thing. And to do that, we have this kind of guardrails, right? Maybe we have our C-3PO with a restraining bolt. We can think about it in that fashion, right? That kind of AI can kind of help us. I don't need to speak every language on Earth. The machine will help me do that. But it will help me communicate with everybody in the galaxy. That's very useful, right? I can communicate better in real time. If translation tools can help us talk better to other nations, that could go a long way. But yeah, it's kind of a big thing, and that's why you're kind of seeing it everywhere. I'm gonna check out that. I remember seeing something like that where he was like, "Oh my God," but yeah. Thank you for that. Any other questions? All right. If you guys are interested, the QR code's there, and all my things are. Oh, did we have another one?
Well, I just had a
Yeah.
quick question. Does AI work better in English versus a different language versus?
No, actually. I mean, we're seeing it in English because of our locale, but like DeepSeek was created in China, and that was a big model that they use, and I think China's on like digging in on this too, and it's kind of it's almost like a arms race in this race to general intelligence.
I was wondering.
Yeah.
Does a certain language have a head start?
I don't. I would say I don't know, but my guess is no, because they can kind of illustrate like this word. You know, gato is next to cat, and you know these kind is related to that, and maybe we can do it in a variety of languages. The European Union has some of the strongest rules and laws that exist on the planet right now around this. You know, the U.S. is a wild west when it comes to this. There's almost nothing going on in terms of control. The EU has got some very serious guardrail measures are in place. How they work, I don't know, but yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I have a survey also to we do have the flyers for our events.
Great. Yeah, and we have flyers over here about, so Chloe Gong's coming March 9th, the author of Lady Fortune. I will say to everybody here, these two sources I found particularly helpful. IBM's master, Martin Keene, I love his videos. He's one of these master inventors at IBM. He does great explanations of the various parts of generative AI, how they work and whatnot. His videos you'll find there, and even their text-based explanations are quite good. I cite these throughout my talk here, but I would highly recommend that you can go and check those out, particularly the videos from the IBM master inventors. Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah. And then all my other, you don't need to see that. Yeah.
Well, no, we have to check your resources.
Check them. Check them. I gave them to you.
How do I know those aren't AI generated?
Exactly. And there's this trust problem, which is always an issue. Yeah. Let me get you back to the QR code, and then you get the whole slide deck if you click on that. Yeah.
And then whenever you're ready with the surveys, I'll just take them.
Yeah, we appreciate you doing the surveys for us.
Yeah, it helps us since we're still building the program to show college education.
We submitted to AI.
Yeah, you have to type that in your AI. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for coming. I appreciate everybody coming today. If you do have any questions, again, I'm at the College of DuPage Library. I can help you investigate it. I don't always have the answers, but I have the curiosity. And so with that, we can kind of start to look for different information, maybe start to understand things together. Again, the Community College Library is open to the public. You can come and ask.
I tell my students that research librarians love a challenge.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Yeah, it's kind of sparks my curiosity. You said that, and I had the tingles went up my neck like that, right? It's a real thing. I enjoy, okay, we'll see if this is real or not. I do that on a weekly basis. So thanks everybody for coming. Thanks everybody for coming out in the internet land, wherever you are, and have a great evening.